Alright, did you do the coding challenge? So here goes the solution. So of course we start by defining the variables that we need for this exercise. So height John, and I set these like randomly to 172 centimeters. You can of course just use some value for yourself. And height Mike, 165. Okay, just AT here. And now the ages of both. So the age of John, and I chose 26, and age of Mike to 29. Now we have to calculate the score for each of them. So score John, and I don't remember the formula for this. So it is the height plus 5 times the age. So in this case, it's height John plus 5 times age John. And now the same thing for Mike. So var score Mike equals height Mike plus 5 times age Mike. Now again, I'm missing the T here. Okay, and so now it's time to start taking the decision. And of course we use an if-else statement to do that. Alright, so how does John win the game? John of course wins the game if his score is greater than Mike's score. So how do we do this? We just write it like this. So score John is greater than score Mike. And in this case, we want to log to the console that John wins the game. And we also want to print the score. So we do it like this. So John wins the game with, and then we put a score here. So score John points. Alright. And now we need to find out how Mike wins the game. Mike wins the game if his score is greater than John's score. And what we need here is an else if. So if the first condition is not true, then go to the second condition. So the second question is score Mike greater than score John? And if it's true, we want to log to the console that Mike wins the game with points. Alright, so and none of these two are true, then we go to the else part of the if-else statement. So that will be console.log there is a draw. Cool. So we could of course make this even more precise by writing else if score John is the exact score than Mike has. So score Mike. Now in this case this wouldn't really be necessary because the only way in which this and this is not true is that they have the same score. So this part would not be necessary here. But just to make sure and just to show it to you, I decided to include it here as well. So let's now take a look at the result of the game. Alright, so Mike wins the game with points, but it's something missing here. And of course, because I didn't include it here. Alright, so I have to of course write score Mike in here and then plus. So let's do it again. And now we have the result. Mike wins the game with 310 points. Let me just check the score of both of them. And that's something we can do here in the console, which I didn't show you before. is that we can actually access these variables that we created here. So all these 6 variables, we can access them here just by writing their name. So for example, we can write score John here, hit enter or hit return, and then we can see their value. So score John is 302 and the score of Mike is 310, and that's why he won the game. So everything is working just fine, right? Now suppose that John was a bit taller, so 192 for example, and now, yeah, here we go. So now John wins the game with 322 points. Let me just check their scores again. And another thing that we can do here in the console is, if we don't want to write our last commands all over again, we can just hit the up arrow key and it will show us our last commands. So score Mike, and if I hit it twice now, score John. So John now has 322 points, which means that he won the game. So everything is working here. So let's now make John a bit smaller again, so that we can see the draw here. 182, let's say. Okay, so John still wins the game with 312 points. So, alright, so difference is just 2 points now. So if I make John 2 centimeters smaller, then we should have a draw. Okay, so here's a draw. So now John's score is the same as Mike's score. Let's just check that. Alright, so they're both 310 points. Alright, so this was the easy part. I hope you got that on your own. It was just the concept that we have talked about before and applied to this very simple game. So let's now take a look at the 4th point, which is adding an extra player. So I will do this without looking at the other code up here. I will also actually comment it out so it doesn't get in our way. I will create some more space so that we can do this without looking at the other code. Okay, so this player will be called Mary, and we will have to create the same variables for her as well. So we need her height, of course, which will be 158, for example, and we need her age. So age Mary will be 31, so she's a bit older. And then we need, of course, to calculate her score. So score Mary equals height Mary plus 5 times her age. And now the decision part is a little bit trickier than what we had before, because now it's not so easy to determine who wins the game. Alright, but let's start again with John. So how does John win the game now? So in order for John to win the game, he needs to have a score higher than Mike and at the same time higher than Mary, right? So how do we write this? So if score John is higher than score Mike, and this is what we already had, and now the magic part is the AND operator. So what we want is that John's score is higher than Mike's and at the same time higher than Mary's. So score John higher than score Mary. Make sense? So let's imagine the following situation. Imagine John has 300 points and Mike has 250 points and Mary has just 200 points. So in this case, John has more than Mike, so this is true, and John has more than Mary as well, so this is true as well. So true and true, as you learned in the last lecture, results in true. So in this case, this would be true, and it makes sense, because that's exactly how John wins the game, if his score is higher than both the other scores. So I will actually copy this part from here, so I don't have to write it over again. So John wins the game with score John points. Alright, and now we need to make the same thing for Mike. So we use the else if statement and write if score Mike is greater than score John, and at the same time score Mike is greater than score Mary. And in this case, Mike wins the game. So I'll just come here and copy this part of the code and paste it here. Alright, and now the same thing for Mary. So this is simple, right? So Mary wins the game if her score is higher than Mike's and John's at the same time. So score Mary needs to be greater than score John, and score Mary needs to be greater than score Mike. And in this case, we have, of course, Mary and score Mary. And now the final part, if none of these happens, then we want to draw. So if no one wins the game, then of course we have a draw. So it is a draw. And let's actually do it differently by saying it's a draw, just to show you something. Because now JavaScript simply finishes this string here, as you can see, as the rest became white. So we open the string and then we close it here. And this part is no longer part of the string, which is not what we want. So we have to escape this character, and we do it here with the backslash symbol. So now JavaScript simply interprets this as part of the string, as part of the text, and no longer sees this as the end of a string. Alright, so let's now run the thing. So Mary wins the game with 313 points. So let's check out their scores. Score John, score Mike, and score Mary. Alright, so this makes sense. So Mary has the most points, so she wins the game. Let's now just change the other players. Let's make him a bit smaller again. At 70, for example. And now Mary still wins the game, of course. Yeah, I should have made Mike taller. Let's make him 195. And now Mike wins the game. And once again, I will check out the scores by hitting the up arrow on my keyboard. And John. Alright, so Mike has the highest score now. Now, if we make John a little bit older, he will probably win the game. Yes, that's right. So John, Mike, and Mary. Now John has the highest score. Alright, so this is working just fine. Alright, so once again, I hope you did the challenge, and if you did, that it was helpful to you. And if you didn't fully complete this part here, then it's not a problem. I'm sure that by now you understood how it works and how we use these Boolean operators, because this is something really important and we will use it all the time. So yeah, this is pretty important that you understand this part. So we will now move on to our next fundamental JavaScript concepts right in the next lecture.